Hello, Conroe Church. I want to welcome you back to our study called Get Your Life Back by Dr. John Eldredge. It is just such an amazing, amazing study. It's been really, really helpful to me. And before we get into this lesson this week, I just want to encourage you to maybe go on Amazon and grab this book, especially if this season of COVID over the last 8 months has really started to drag you down and you're starting to, one of the things that we've said over and over is this season has revealed some things in ourselves. It's kind of like it's pulled back the mask in some ways, and it's revealed some things in each one of us that we probably didn't know were there or didn't know were that bad, and it's been rough. And so if that has been the case for you, I just want to encourage you to go ahead and grab this book. You can get it on Amazon. I would encourage you to get the study guide, because the study guide can actually guide you through it as well. But the lessons in this and the things that he talks about are so very important to us. And he didn't write it during the COVID season. He wrote it just shortly before that. But he couldn't have known that these things were just dead on. They're just spot on for the way that we're living today and what we're living through today. So I would encourage you to go grab it. This is lesson number 4 out of 6. The lesson number 3 I thought was a very encouraging and affirming lesson. This is a very challenging lesson, not in a bad way, but it is. You get into the deep weeds on this. It's serious stuff, and I think it'll be really, really helpful to you if you'll engage it. But I just want to tell you up front, this is not a feel-good lesson. This is a lesson that there's some real soul work in. So hopefully it'll be something that after we finish, I finish this, we finish the videos, you have the questions that you can really dive into, because I really think it's going to address an area of our lives that we neglect a lot. So, with that said, let's get rolling. Over the past couple of decades, attention spans have decreased and decreased and decreased. And, I've heard that blamed on so many things. I read an article many years ago that blamed it on MTV. When MTV came along in 1980 or 81, whichever one it was, and they were making music videos, back when music videos were on MTV, the images would change just like this, and they did a study, and again, this study probably is at least 20 years old, if not older than that the images in videos would actually change every 4 seconds, and so what it was doing was rewiring our brains to shorten and shorten and shorten our attention span. I don't know what, it's probably a million things. I don't know which one, but it has been scientifically proven that our attention spans are dramatically shorter today than they were just a couple of decades ago. So there's one element. Another element is that the pace at which we live our lives has increased exponentially from where we did 2 decades ago. I mean, if you plot it on a graph, that line is going to go almost straight up now, because the pace at which we live life, and we try to juggle all these things, we try to cram everything into every day, and we live 24/7 in our days where we pack everything. We don't rest much at all. We don't take time to stop and consider God very often, and we try to pack in all this stuff, and we're just busy, busy, busy. So we have those 2 elements. We have the attention spans becoming shorter, and they're tied together, and then we have this pace at which we live, both of those over the last 2 decades being so accelerated that now that has caused a real, real deep problem in us. At times, just something it's like the frog in the kettle, and you get used to it just a little bit at a time because it changes like that. But over time, it has caused an issue deep in our souls. It's caused a real deep soul issue, those 2 things put together. The soul problems are many that it causes, but one of them is called presence. Presence. We are not as present to each other today as we were on the whole 20 years ago. Here's what I mean by that. I'll give you an example. So when you eat a meal, how often do you eat with your cell phone right there? If you're eating by yourself, how often do you eat a meal with your cell phone in your hand or sitting on the table right next to you? If you're like most people, that would be real often, like most of the time, like almost all the time. But let's go a step further. How often do you eat with your cell phone next to you when you're eating with someone else, you're eating with a family member or a friend? How often is your cell phone sitting on the table? You may be having conversation, but your cell phone is sitting on the table. and here it is right here. And you're trying to talk, and it's face up, and you see an alert comes through, and you see when your phone lights up, or you feel it when it vibrates. How often do you do that? If you're like most people walk into any restaurant right now that's open and look around and see cell phone. You got your plate, and you got your drink, and you got your cell phone. I mean, it's just a piece of the world that we live in now. A few Sundays ago after worship, Joe Ellis and I were eating at a restaurant down the street, and it's a Mexican food place that we love just right down the street in the Strip Center. And so we go there pretty often, and we were eating in that restaurant, and we noticed this young couple that sat next to us, and they looked like they probably were in their early, mid-30s, something like that. And they sat down, and they didn't say anything to each other. They looked at the menus, they put them aside, and as soon as they put them aside, they both picked up their phones and started looking at their phones. We saw the waiter come over, take their order. They gave their order, the waiter left, and they kept looking at their phones. But all of that time, they did not say one single word. From the time they walked in, they didn't even acknowledge that the other one existed. And these folks weren't social distancing. They were 3 feet apart. And it's like they weren't even there. And so since they were seated just right next to us, we just kind of had an eye on them during our lunch. And we noticed that they went their entire lunch. They left before we did. They went their entire lunch without saying one single word, without even making eye contact. They just kept looking at their phone, doing stuff on their phone. And I don't know if they were watching videos, but they didn't even show a funny video to the other. They didn't do anything. They did not act like the other one existed, and yet here they were just right across the table from each other. They were in each other's presence technically, but not in any other way. There was no presence there. They were just looking at their phones the entire time. It was an amazing thing, but here's the deal. That's not the first time that I've seen that. And I imagine it's not the first time that you've seen that. And if we're just going to be real honest, I've done that. I have just sat there and been glued to my phone when maybe I probably wouldn't do that with somebody else, but Joe Ellis and I, we've caught ourselves doing that on occasion. So we finally went, we're keeping our phones put up while we eat. We're not going to do this. Only because we see what happens, what it looks like to other people. It looked like that couple didn't even like each other, much less love each other. I don't know if they were husband and wife or not, but the appearance was they didn't even look like they liked each other. They didn't even acknowledge the existence of each other. And so it was out of a conviction of that we went, well, we got to not do that. That's not healthy. See, presence, and listen, today's lesson is not really about technology at all. That's a symptom. That's a symptom of the issue that we'll deal with today that's a whole lot deeper than any technology. It's a whole lot more than just the fact that we're addicted to our phones. It's about the fact that we so often, it's partially about the fact that we so often feel so shallow. Why do we feel so shallow? What is it in our lives that makes us feel like we're just kind of living on the surface? There's nothing deep going on there, and while we're running real fast, it doesn't matter. But when we ever slow down, maybe just to go to sleep at night, something will come up and we'll go, man, we've got some stuff in our life we haven't even dealt with. Well, part of it is because our presence tends to be taken away. But again, please hear me. This is not, you'll see in the video, this is not about technology. It's about something much, much deeper. This is not about how we've developed new habits and we need to break those with technology. It's not about that. We talk about that sometimes. I think there's truth in it. It's not about that. This is not about how our brains are being rewired, to actually, for that real fast attention span. It's not about that. That's probably a symptom of it as well, but this isn't about that. It's about something much, much deeper. So let's watch the video, and as we watch the video, just give yourself to what he is talking about. Just try it. If you can shut off anything else that's going on around you, and just listen to the words that he speaks, because they're very, very profound. Again, they address an area of life that you may not have even thought about. But I'll tell you what, during this time of COVID, it's a perfect time to be able to address some of the things that we may have neglected for years and years and years, to the very detriment of our soul. So let's watch the video. We'll come back and knock it around for a minute.
I know, I know, that's really poignant. And you're probably wondering, where are we going in this session? This is going to be kind, it's going to be gracious. But we are talking about here in session 4, caring for the neglected places in our souls. And before we jump into the pause this week, I want to set it up because we're going to use the pause in a different way than we have before, okay? We've been exploring how this crazy world continues to push us into the shallows of our own hearts and souls, how technology and media and our consumption and obsession with it is literally changing the structure of our brains and shortening our attention span and making us sort of scattered. And then you add to that, just the insane pace of life. And what we find is that we are not able to be present, truly present to our own life and to the people around us. Much of this experiment, much of this book, and much of my writing on this came out of self-discovery. And one of those moments for me was with my grandchildren. Stacy and I are grandparents now, and we have some wee ones, 2 little girls and a little boy, and I love their visits. I love being with them. But what I noticed was that I could be present to them for about 5 minutes. And then I just found myself preoccupied with other things, wanting to check my phone, wanting to get online, wanting to think about work. I couldn't be there for them. I couldn't be soul to soul, life to life. And when you are with little ones, it is timeless. They're not watching the clock, but I was. And I didn't like that. I didn't like the shallowing of my own soulful experience of life, okay? So that's what we're exploring. That's what we're trying to get out of. That's what we're trying to get our lives back from. More of God, more of our soul, more of life together. And we've got to be honest. We are actually in love with the distraction. There's something in human nature that just doesn't want to deal with the more difficult things, okay? Now be frank. How many of you have heard that little tick, 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 or thump, thump, thump coming from the engine or the transmission of your car and just ignored it for months, hoping that it would go away, right, and fix itself? How many of us done this with our health, right? We ignore the painful little hitch or the loss of breath, the troubling indigestion, the lump, the few extra pounds, crying out for attention, and we just ignore it for years, hoping that it'll magically fix itself, okay? Right, we all do this. Our son's childhood bedroom was downstairs, underneath the upstairs master bathroom. And anytime somebody took a shower or flushed the toilet up there, you could hear the water, flushing down through the pipes and the walls downstairs. It was sort of like a water attraction in a theme park, sort of like a new Disney thing under the sea. Anyway, I was upstairs one day and I noticed that the toilet had become a little bit loose on its foundation. And I thought, uh-oh, I hope that thing's not leaking. And I went back downstairs and looked up at the ceiling and, oh no, sure enough, here's some water stain on the ceiling. And so I get the ladder and some tools to kind of figure out how bad is this. And luckily it was not bad and it wasn't recent. And I thought to myself, okay, I need to take care of that. And I let it go for an entire year. Now, to be honest, I forgot, okay? But to be truly honest, I wanted to forget. I just didn't want the hassle of dealing with that. And this is so much more true for our souls in this crazy hour with the pace of life and the distraction. It's just so much easier to push the more difficult things aside. Issues of loss and disappointment, issues of unmet dreams and expectations, so much easier to just send all that to the back of the bus. But the problem is, it catches up with us. Depression is now the leading cause of disability worldwide. And with it has been a rise of anxiety and a host of other emotional issues, our need for a lot of pharmaceuticals, and the tragic epidemic of suicide. You see, what that is the neglected soul crying out for attention. I mentioned to you last time my Montana road trip with God that Jesus invited me to take, and the drinking in of beauty and nature and just I just needed to detox from my world. Well, I brought my fishing gear along because as a fisherman, I thought, far out. This is going to be days of just hours of fishing. 2 days I spent fishing. I caught one fish. And finally, I'm like, Jesus, what's with that? And he says, John, this isn't a fishing trip. I'm like, it's not? He's like, no, this is a soul recovery trip. You're not here for relief. You're here to address some things you had neglected in your soul. And I knew he was right. I knew he was right. I had lost my best friend to cancer. We had lost a grandchild in a terrible miscarriage. We had lost a family dog. Heartbreaking things, a whole host of relational disappointments. And I had just pushed all that aside in the mad pace of my life. And Jesus was seizing the moment to say, let's go back and deal with that. There is a beautiful picture of this in the Gospel of John in chapter 21. You might recall the story. This is after the resurrection of Jesus. And the boys have gone fishing, and Jesus appears on the beach and asks them if they've caught anything, and then he produces the second miraculous catch of fish. The boys come to shore, they have breakfast together, and then Jesus has this beautiful encounter with Peter. Now, let's remember why. The last time Peter saw Jesus, he was denying him 3 times on that horrible, horrible night before his crucifixion. And afterwards, the scripture says Peter went out and wept bitterly. Okay, so grief, shame, heartache, self-hatred, all of that has gone unaddressed in Peter's life. Now, Jesus is back and the boys are together again, but Jesus knows that he can't leave that unaddressed in Peter's soul. So let's pick up the gospel story there. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said, you know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The 3rd time, he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the 3rd time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. This is an extraordinarily beautiful story. How many times did Peter deny Jesus? 3. How many times did Jesus ask Peter, do you love me? 3. Do you see what Jesus is doing? He's pushing into that grief, shame, regret, self-reproach. He's bringing it to the surface so that he and Peter can be reconciled in this place. In other places, they're fine, but it's here in the neglected place that Peter needs care. He needs restoration. I absolutely love that about God. He will not let us go on very long neglecting important places in our soul. And here's why. In our search to find life, to get our life back, in our search to love and live and laugh, in our search to be present to others and get out of this madness, in our search for more of God, we often can't find it because we are looking with so little of ourselves. Over time, the shellification of our souls, we're like stream banks that have just been eroded over time with little and little of us remaining. And that's why we can't find the life we're looking for, and it's why we often can't experience more of God. And so Jesus won't leave us there. I mentioned our family dog. I love dogs. I'm a dog person, and in the course of my life, we've always had dogs. When I was single, I had this beautiful dog named Joshua. He was a wilderness dog. He was part Border Collie, part Pyrenees, and we went backpacking together and road trips. He was never on a leash in his entire life. He was an amazing dog. And when he died, I thought to myself, that's it. I don't want to face that again. And so it took a lot of years, family, children, and then finally it was time for a family dog. And we got this great golden retriever named Scout, and he was so fun to be with. He loved canoeing and hiking and a taste for underwear. He was a hoot to be around. Okay. And when we lost Scout, oh, it was like no more. And it took years again for us to get our third family dog. And I just buried him a few months ago. And what happens is that over time, through our disappointments and our frustrations and our heartbreaks and our setbacks and unfulfilled dreams, we just leave parts of our soul behind. Just less and less of us shows up for the game, okay? And so Jesus circles back around to us to say, look, we've got to take care of that. And here's the thing, this mad world is never going to encourage you to take care of your soul. Take care of the neglected places in your soul. Did you know that the average corporate bereavement leave for a spouse, having lost a spouse, is 4 days? 4 days. That is madness. I mean, you haven't even begun to breathe at 4 days. You are concussive with the trauma of the loss. The world just wants us to get on with it. Just put all that aside and get on with doing. So Jesus circles back around. As Psalm 34:18 says, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Jesus cares about your losses and disappointments and griefs, and he will help you, like he did with Peter. He will help you attend to the neglected places in your soul so that more of you can come back and be part of this life. All right, now we're ready to practice our pause. Because oftentimes what I will use my pause for is to invite Jesus in to the neglected places in my soul. Some recent frustration, some loss I've just skipped over, some disappointment I had to just blow by because of the pace of life. When I have a chance to pause, okay? So what I want to ask you for a moment is to think about what are the disappointments that you've had to just blow by in the past year. Now, I'm not suggesting you go on a witch hunt. This isn't uncover every failure and disappointment in your life, every piece of heartache. No, let's just find one thing that we can invite Jesus into. What relational disappointment or lost dream or career frustration have you experienced that you just haven't had a chance to invite God into? We're going to use the pause for that. So as we practice the pause now, go to those places. Ask Jesus to show you, Lord, where are you coming for me? Where have I neglected my soul? Where have I neglected my soul? I know that's a difficult thing to do, and it's crazy to suggest that we do it in 60 seconds, but we're not done. I'm going to help you care for your soul right here in this session. The first thing is just to identify and to begin to name neglected places in our soul. Because then what we want to do is learn the process of giving Jesus access to these places. So back to my Montana, the fishing trip that wasn't a fishing trip. So what I began to do was journal. Jesus said, just start writing down your losses, start naming the things. And it wasn't hard. I mean, there were some very big ones, but there were some small ones too that I had neglected. And then one by one, Jesus said, now invite me in. This is a very, very beautiful passage from the book of Revelation, very famous. You all probably remember this. Jesus says, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in. So here's the key to emotional healing, all right? The door opens from the inside. We can't ask Jesus, would you go take care of that thing? I mean, I know there's that, that loss I suffered or that dream that wasn't fulfilled, that desire that was crushed. Would you go take care of that? It's not hostage negotiation, right? You don't get to stay 3 blocks down the street and ask Christ to go in, all right? The door opens from the inside. The reason he wants us to enter these places like he made Peter enter, the place of his sorrow and grief is because we open the door to Christ from inside our own soul, okay? We have to be present to it to allow Jesus to come in. So now what I want to do is pray with you and just kind of give you a feel of how I do this in my own life. So you've named 1 or 2, 3 neglected places, losses, disappointments, unattended griefs. Now let's invite Christ in. So here's how I pray. Lord Jesus, forgive me for neglecting this for so long. I'm sorry, Lord. Forgive me for neglecting this for so long. You know this very well. But I have been distant from my own soul, and I want to inhabit my soul again. And so I come back to this place. I come back to this loss or grief or disappointment. And here in this place, as I'm feeling it, I invite you in. I open the door from the inside. Jesus, come in. I give you permission to restore my soul here. I know you wait for me to let you in. And so I let you in now. Jesus, come to me and meet me here. Restore my soul. Restore my soul. In your name, I pray. Now, friends, that's just a beginning, and it's something to learn to practice over time, but you would be surprised how much beautiful work Jesus can do if you will just inhabit your own soul. Come back to the neglected places and then open the door from the inside and let him in. Now, I understand some things may be surfacing that you need someone to talk to, and you might want to go to your pastor or priest or a Christian therapist and really talk through those things. And I recommend that highly. But over time, I found that simple prayer of inviting Christ in can do really good things for your soul. Now, there's more in the book, and there's more in your study guide to guide you in where to go this week with this. But I want to close with this. When I lost my best friend to cancer a couple years ago, I was very aware of the soul care process. I was very in touch with my loss and my grief, and I just began to pay attention what heals the soul and what doesn't. And I began to make a list, and I found it to be very, very interesting, helpful and unhelpful, okay? Helpful, generous amounts of sunshine, everything living and green, long walks, lonesome country roads, swimming, beauty, music, friendly dogs, compassion, not expecting myself to produce the same level of work I normally accomplish in a day. Yard work, building a fence. Unhelpful, in the unhelpful category, pay attention to this. Grocery stores, malls, television, traffic, draining people wanting to talk to me, okay? Airports, the news, especially politics, social media, your typical dose of movie violence. Now, the thing is, which of those lists make up most of our average week, right? Do you see how important it is to learn to unplug from the madness and care for your soul? Friends, the good news is we can live as more wholehearted human beings. He really does restore our souls. We get more of our life back. We can experience more of God. Oh, and by the way, we have a new member of our family. It's a choice, a deliberate choice on my part to stay open, to keep my heart and soul open to hope and to joy and to life. and God is using him to restore our souls.
You know, one of the verses, I just want to reiterate a couple of things that Eldredge says here because they are just so good and profound and helpful for us. One of my favorite verses is that Psalm 34:18 verse. I absolutely love that. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted. He saves those who are crushed in spirit. Have you ever been brokenhearted? I mean, if you're a human, the answer to that is yes. And here's a guess. Over the last 8 months, I bet there has been so much more brokenheartedness than at any other 8-month period in your life. It's going to be my guess. It may not be true for everybody, but I bet it's true for most. There's been a whole lot of heartbreak going on. How about losing a loved one and not being able to do a memorial service? You know, how about weddings that got called off or got postponed, and when two people have been planning toward a certain date and they couldn't have the wedding, or they had the wedding. I saw one picture. It was really cool. It was really creative, and I loved it. And they had put pictures. They had taped in a room like this. They had taped pictures of people's faces to the backs of the pews, so that when you looked out, you could see all these faces. And I thought that was a great way to do it. You know, the problem is those people weren't really there. They couldn't clap when the husband and bride kissed and walked down the aisle. They couldn't celebrate with them at a reception afterward. I mean, how many times has your heart been broken during the last 8 months? Maybe in just some small way, and maybe not. But the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. He saves those who are crushed in spirit. Take brokenhearted and go another step or two into crushed. How many times have you been crushed? How many times have you felt like the weight of the world was so heavy on your shoulders that you didn't know how you're going to be able to take your next step? The Lord is close to the broken heart. He saves those who are crushed in spirit. And so circle back to that story of Peter. If ever there's been somebody who has been brokenhearted, whose spirit has been crushed, that's the better term for Peter. So, you know, there in John chapter 21, the passage that Eldredge quotes in the video, remember, that all happened right after the crucifixion. You know, so remember, leading up to the crucifixion, Peter is the guy who, he draws his sword in the Garden of Gethsemane, cuts off Malchus' ear. He's the guy who goes, if everyone else leaves you, Jesus, I won't be leaving you. I'm your guy. I will never, ever run away from you. And that's very true of Peter until he does run away. And not only does he run away while Jesus goes through the passion, through all the horrific torture that leads up to the crucifixion, which is the apex of torture. Not only does Jesus do all of that alone, but, you know, he's a bystander. Everybody else runs away, but Peter comes and watches, but he's confronted. You remember? He's confronted there. And 3 times they said, aren't you one of his guys? And he goes, no. And he cusses to make sure that they understand one time. And you remember after that 3rd time, when he denies Jesus, it says, he's in a courtyard, and it says that Jesus turns and looks at him. Can you imagine the eyes of Jesus looking at you? Was Jesus mad? I'm certain he was not. I'm certain he was hurt, but I'm certain he wasn't mad. But can you imagine Jesus turning and looking at you when you have just denied that you even knew him 3 times? So think about Peter. Then there's the crucifixion. Jesus is gone. He's buried. Peter's world is turned upside down. He doesn't know which way is up. He doesn't know what to think. He doesn't know what to do. He goes back out to fish because it's really the only thing he knows to do. And Peter just doesn't have a clue about his future. And on top of that, what is that guy carrying? Think of the guilt that he is carrying for denying Jesus, and he can't even say anything to him. Think about the shame that he's carrying. I mean, think about the self-loathing that Peter is carrying because of that. Can you imagine the conversations that he's had with himself about doing what he did? I mean, there is no way to get, Peter was brokenhearted, yeah, but Peter was crushed. I mean, that man was crushed. And then here comes back Jesus. Think about that first interaction with Jesus and Peter. And so, Eldredge says something about, is there any significance to Jesus asking him 3 times, do you love me? And there's the correlation with Peter denying Jesus 3 times, sure, and that's got to be a part of it. But there's got to be more than that. Because, again, think about what Peter is thinking about himself. Think about how his heart is just absolutely crushed. Don't you imagine that Peter had a really hard time looking at Jesus in the eyes the first time he saw him? He's so thrilled, and then Jesus standing there brings back everything about his denial, the cursing he used, the way he ran away, the way Jesus looked at him. They made eye contact across the courtyard. It brings all of that back. Don't you imagine that Peter had such a hard time even looking Jesus in the eyes? And yet, Jesus wasn't angry or mean. He didn't get up. He didn't put a finger in Peter's face and yell at him. He forgave him. And Peter had to know deep down inside, he had to know that Jesus forgave him. But there was more than that. There still was that shame and that guilt and that self-loathing. And so Jesus asks him, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? Not because Peter didn't understand the question the first time or the second time, but so that Peter could get rid of the toxin that was in him. Jesus needed Peter to go be one of the most amazing disciples and evangelists the world has ever seen. I mean, Peter was one of the lead guys that took the Christian faith into all the world. Jesus needed him for that. He didn't need a crushed, defeated man. He needed a man who knew that despite all of the ways that he denied him and ran away, all the things that he thought, all the things that he said, he needed Peter to know that he was loved, and he was, even more than that, restored. He was restored. See, Jesus is that Lord who is close to the brokenhearted. He is that Lord who does save those who are crushed in spirit. And Eldredge quotes the Apostle John right there in Revelation, right toward the end of the last book in the Bible. He says, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I'll come in. Well, there's that little phrase, and opens the door. And opens the door. See, opening the door is not Jesus' choice, it's yours. That's your choice, and that's my choice. Jesus knocks, but we don't have to open the door, and he's not going to kick it in. The choice then becomes ours. Do we want Jesus to come in to help us deal with our stuff? And again, in the last 8 months, what surfaced in your life that you haven't liked? Because there's been plenty of stuff that has come to the surface because of our circumstances. For me, that I don't like. And we've seen it, our behavior in this country right now has got to be the most uncivil behavior in decades, maybe centuries, who knows? This stuff is surfacing, and we're treating each other not like someone who was created by God, but where we treat them like they're mortal enemies. I mean, we treat whatever political side you're on, we tend to treat whatever side it is, the other side, not like they're the opposition in a political election, but like they're the enemy. And we do that with people who don't feel the same way that we do in regard to different pieces of the coronavirus and all the ways that we address it. I mean, think about that. The door has to be opened by us because all of this ugly behavior is out there. It's surfacing things. And so, remember, Eldredge says, the door opens from the inside. That's your choice, is to open the door. And if you'll open the door and you'll let Jesus come in, he'll help you heal in these areas that have been neglected for a long time. So here are some discussion questions, just a few discussion questions. And I just want to make a promise with these. If you will seriously spend some time with them, they will pay huge, huge dividends, not just now, but for the rest of your life. If you seriously consider them, maybe you sit down with somebody that you love and you go through them with that person. I promise they'll pay dividends. So the first one is this. Why do we sometimes tend to stuff away painful times in our lives and pretend that they never happened? A little over a year ago, I lost a very dear friend, my best friend in the world. I lost my best friend. And I dealt with that for a couple of days, and then I just kept going. And I really haven't dealt with that loss. How many times do we just stuff away painful things because we just don't want to deal with it and we're just too busy? There's a question. How about this question? What is one area of your soul that you have neglected that you know of over the past 8 months of COVID? What's an area of your soul that you neglected? There's got to be one for every single one of us. Just name one of yours. How about this? And this is what Eldredge talked about. What is it that heals your soul? I've heard that question worded like this. What are some things that are life-giving for you? And so, he named a lot of the same things I would name. For me, life-giving, I love working out in the yard. I love music. I love to listen to music, but I love to go to concerts, and I love to go to plays. And that's been something that I've lost during this time. There's no concerts. There's no plays going on right now. And those are things that I love. Those are life-giving for me. Music. Walking in nature, you can see God in a million different ways. We've talked about that so many times. Those are some things that are life-giving to me. Spending time with my wife, just reading a book or walking through nature or sitting on the back porch and listening to nature are things that I love, just being able to be with my wife. What are some things that are life-giving? So here's what we're going to do. We're going to make 2 lists. That's one list. All right, here's the next one. What doesn't heal your soul? When down in Houston, there's this road called FM 1960, and they renamed it Cypress Creek Parkway. I guess because FM 1960 just had such a bad reputation, but they renamed it Cypress Creek Parkway a few years ago. It didn't change the road. I still hate going on that road. It's just stoplight after stoplight. It's nothing but concrete jungle. And I will do anything in my power to avoid spending much time on 1960 because it is just nothing but stop, start, thick traffic. And every once in a while you'll see people just race through there. It seems to bring out the worst in people. And it's a very heavily traveled road. So I'm with him. I don't like traffic. I don't like loud noise just for the sake of loud noise. Sometimes it comes into our life and that's okay, but just over and over and over. Someone's going to use a jackhammer to drill up concrete. I don't want to sit there for an hour and watch it. Just loud noises. Really, really rude, hateful people who don't show the love of Jesus, they bother me. And here's what bothers me even more. I tend to be one of those sometimes. Sometimes I lose who I am, and I will think, even if I don't say anything, I'll think something unloving. Those are some things that don't heal my soul. In the spiritual formation world, those are called desolations. Now, the good things are called consolations. So that is going to be your second list. And then his question is key. And this could be the game changer for you. Make your 2 lists and go, how much time do I spend with the bad list? And how much time do I spend with the good list? That's an easy change in theory that you can make. Maybe a little bit harder in practice. But that's an easy change in theory that you can make to start going, all right, the toxins that are in my soul, it could be sin or it just could be unresolved things. Let's get those out so that we can live more wholly with God. And so invite God into this wrestling. Because you're going to find purpose and meaning in the middle of the wrestling. And ultimately, you'll find healing. So Conroe Church, go in peace.